Mom doesn't deserve anything. My son didn't raise his voice when he said it, but he didn't need to. The words landed in the quiet room like something sharp, something final. I didn't move. I didn't look at him that I didn't look at anyone. I just kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers resting lightly against each other, as if I were attending a stranger's funeral instead of my own husband's while reading. If you're here with me, stay until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. Because what happened that day, it didn't begin in that room, and it certainly didn't end there. The law office smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. Everything was neat, controlled, predictable, unlike the people sitting around that table. To my right, my son Daniel leaned back in his chair like he already owned the place, one arm draped casually over the armrest. His expression relaxed, almost bored. Across from me, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, sat perfectly straight, elegant, composed, watching, not grieving, watching. Her fingers rested on a leather folder, nails manicured in a soft, neutral shade. She tapped them lightly, once, twice, like she was waiting for something she already knew was coming. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was the silence. No one asked me if I was okay. No one mentioned my husband. 42 years of marriage, reduced to paperwork and quiet anticipation. The attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, glancing in my direction before quickly looking away again. "We'll begin shortly." I nodded. That was all I gave him, because something inside me had already begun to shift. I had dressed carefully that morning, not out of vanity, out of respect. A dark navy dress, simple, elegant. The kind Robert always said made me look like myself. My silver hair pulled back neatly. Pearl earrings. His favorite. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I needed to. Not adjusting. Just looking. Trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. A widow. A mother. Someone who had spent decades building a life that now felt strangely distant. "I'll make sure you're taken care of," Robert used to say. He said it so often, it became a kind of quiet promise woven into our everyday life. Not dramatic, not grand, just certain. That's what I believed. I was walking into that. Office to receive. Not money, not property, certainty. But then Daniel spoke. "Mom doesn't deserve anything." Just like that. No hosetashchen, no epalegi. And something inside the room changed. I felt it before I fully understood it. A subtle tightening in the air. The attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Vanessa didn't move at all. She just smiled. Not broadly, not obviously, just enough. I turned my head slowly. Not fast, not reactive, just enough to look at my son. Really look at him. This was the same boy who used to crawl into bed with me after thunderstorms. The same child who cried when his goldfish died. The same young man who once told me, "Mom, I don't know what I'd do without you." Now he wouldn't even meet my eyes. Instead, he looked at the attorney. As I said, Daniel continued, his tone calm, almost businesslike. "My father built everything. My mother didn't contribute financially. I think that should be taken into account. Financially." The word echoed in my mind, as if a life could be measured that way. As if the years I spent raising him, supporting Robert, holding the household together, could be reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't defend myself. I simply listened, because something deeper than anger was beginning to take shape. Something quieter, colder. The attorney cleared his throat again. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "your father's wishes are documented clearly. I will proceed with reading the will as written." Daniel leaned back again, unfazed. Vanessa finally looked at me. Her eyes lingered just a second too long. There it was. Not sympathy, not discomfort, recognition, like she already knew how this would end. And in that moment, sitting there in that polished, silent room, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just grief. This wasn't just a difficult day. This was something planned, something arranged, something I'd been slowly, quietly removed from. And the worst part? I had missed it. Or maybe I had chosen not to see it. The attorney opened the folder. Papers shifted. The sound was soft, but it felt loud. Final. Irreversible. I straightened slightly in my chair. Not out of fear. Not out of hope. But because I suddenly understood Whatever was about to be read was not the life I thought I had lived. And for the first time since Robert died, I didn't feel grief. I felt something else, something far more dangerous. I felt clarity. The morning of the will reading was quiet, not peaceful, just quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. The house didn't sound the same without Robert. No soft footsteps in the hallway and coffee already brewing before I woke up. And low hum of the radio, playing those old jazz stations he loved. Just silence. I stood in the kitchen longer than I needed to, one hand resting on the edge of the counter, staring at the empty chair across from me. His chair. I hadn't moved it. I couldn't. I made coffee out of habit. 2 cups. I didn't realize it until I was already pouring the second one. The steam rose slowly, curling into the air before disappearing. I stared at it for a moment, then quietly poured it down the sink. No tears, just a small, controlled movement, like everything else in my life had become. It had been 8 days since we buried him. 8 days since I stood beside a polished wooden casket, listening to people talk about what a good man my husband was. A provider, a leader, a successful businessman. They weren't wrong, but they didn't know the man who sat barefoot on the porch every Sunday morning, drinking coffee and asking me what I wanted to do with the rest of our lives. They didn't know the way he looked at me when he thought no one else was watching. Like I was still everything. I carried my cup to the dining room. The table was still set the way it had been the night before the funeral. I hadn't cleared it. Didn't see the point. A plate. A folded napkin. His reading glasses still resting near the edge where he left them. I reached out and touched them lightly. Cold. Everything felt cold now. Daniel hadn't been back to the house since the funeral. Not once. He called once. Maybe twice. Short conversations. Practical. Did you handle the insurance paperwork? Have you contacted the attorney? We should schedule the will reading soon. No, how are you, Mom? No, do you need anything? Just tasks. Like I had already been moved into a different category. Something between responsibility and inconvenience. Vanessa, on the other hand, had texted. Not called. Never called. Her messages were always polished. Careful. We're here if you need anything. Let us know if you want help organizing things. Daniel is very busy right now, but we'll make time if necessary. If necessary. I read that message twice, then a third time, trying to understand what necessary meant. I never replied. I walked through the house slowly that morning, room by room, not searching, just observing. The living room where we hosted every Christmas for the past 30 years. The kitchen where I taught Daniel how to bake his first pie. He burned it, laughed, and insisted it was perfect anyway. The hallway where Robert once stopped me mid-step just to kiss my forehead for no reason at all. Every space held something. Every space mattered. And yet, there have been small changes. Subtle. Easy to ignore if you didn't look too closely. A drawer that had been rearranged. Documents that had been moved. The small safe in Robert's study, the one he rarely locked. Now, closed tightly, the code no longer working when I tried it last week. At the time, I told myself it was grief. That I must have remembered wrong. That I was just tired. But standing there in the doorway of his study that morning, I felt something else. Not confusion. Not sadness. Something sharper. A question I hadn't wanted to ask. When did things start changing? And more importantly, who changed them? I stepped inside slowly. The room still smelled like him. Cedar, paper, a hint of that cologne he wore for years. His desk was neat. Too neat. Robert was never messy, but he wasn't precise like this. Not like someone had gone through every paper and decided what stayed and what disappeared. I opened one drawer. Empty. Another. Organized. Files labeled in handwriting that wasn't his. I froze. For a moment, I just stood there, listening, as if the house itself might answer me. But it didn't. It stayed silent, just like everyone else had. I closed the drawer gently, not slamming, not reacting, just closing it, because something deep inside me had already started to understand what my mind hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't grief rearranging my memory. This was intention. I looked at the safe again, ran my fingers lightly across the surface. Cold metal, unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to me. That was the moment I should have called. Someone, asked questions, demanded answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to hear what those answers might be. Instead, I went upstairs, got dressed, chose the navy dress, the pearls, brushed my hair slowly, carefully, like I was preparing for something important. Because I was. I just didn't know exactly what. As I stood in front of the mirror one last time, I said something out loud. Not loudly, just enough to hear it myself. "You'll be taken care of." Robert's words. I repeated them once, then again, letting them settle, testing if they still felt true. And for a brief moment, I believed them. But as I turned off the bedroom light and walked out of that room, a small, quiet part of me whispered something else. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. What if that promise had already been taken away? By the time I arrived at the attorney's office, I had already gone numb in the way grief teaches you to. Not fully numb, just enough to get through the motions. The receptionist greeted me with the careful softness people use around widows, as if I might shatter from a single wrong syllable. She offered coffee, water, a sympathetic smile. I declined all three. Then I sat in the waiting area beneath a framed landscape painting of a lake I'd never seen, watching the second hand on the wall clock move one stiff tick at a time. Daniel and Vanessa arrived 7 minutes later. I noticed because I had nothing else to look at. Vanessa entered first, one hand resting lightly against the strap of her handbag, her posture straight, polished, composed. She wore cream. Not white exactly, but close enough that it struck me as odd. Too bright for a morning period. Too deliberate for an accident. Daniel followed behind her, phone in hand, thumb moving across the screen even as they approached the desk. He didn't look up until the receptionist said his name. Then he saw me. His expression shifted for half a second. Not warmth, not guilt, just surprise that I was already there. "Mom," he said. That was all. No hug, no hand on my shoulder. No, "How are you holding up?" Just one word, flat and functional. "Daniel," I replied. Vanessa gave me the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. "Evelyn," she said gently. "You look lovely, lovely." Am I? Husbands will reading. I thank her anyway, because women my age are taught to survive discomfort by making it easier for everyone else. The conference room was colder than the hallway. There was a long walnut table in the center, for padded chairs on each side, and a pitcher of water beside a stack of legal folders arranged with almost ceremonial precision. The blinds were half drawn, letting in narrow bands of pale morning light that striped the table like bars. I chose the seat closest to the window, not for the view, for the distance. Daniel sat 2 chairs away from me instead of beside me. That small decision should not have mattered, but it did. Vanessa took the seat beside him, not touching him, not leaning into him, but positioned close enough to signal alignment. United front. I'd seen that arrangement before at family holidays, when she wanted to steer a conversation without appearing to lead it. Mr. Holloway, the attorney, entered moments later with a file in his hands and discomfort already visible around his eyes. He was older than Daniel by at least 20 years, younger than me by maybe 10. Robert had trusted him. That mattered to me, or at least it used to. He greeted us all, but when he shook my hand, he held it a fraction longer. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. "Nearly. Thank you," I said. Then we all sat down, and the room changed. Not physically, but in the way rooms do when people stop pretending they are gathered for the same reason. Mr. Holloway opened the file and adjusted his glasses. "As you know," he began, "we are here to review the estate documents left by Robert Carter." Estate documents. There was something almost cruel about how clean the language sounded, as if a marriage could be folded into a file, as if 42 years could be itemized. He continued speaking, outlining the process, the standard formalities, the legal sequence of disclosure. I heard the words, but not in a way that fully reached me. My attention had shifted to Daniel. He still wouldn't look at me. He wasn't nervous in the obvious way. No shaking hands, no stammering, no flushed face. But he was too still, too settled, like a man trying very hard not to disturb something already arranged. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed perfectly comfortable. That disturbed me more. She folded her hands on the table and listened with a calm attentiveness that bordered on satisfaction. Not grief, not sorrow, anticipation. Every so often, Daniel would tilt his head the slightest bit toward her. Not enough to draw notice from anyone who didn't know him. But I knew him, or at least I knew the boy he used to be. When he was hiding something as a child, he used to look down and to the left. When he was waiting for approval, he looked toward the person he feared disappointing. That morning, he kept glancing, almost imperceptibly, toward his wife. Not his mother, his wife. I folded my hands tighter in my lap beneath the table. No one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. Mr. Holloway turned a page. There are several assets to address, he said. Real property, investment accounts, business holdings, and personal effects. Business holdings. That caught my attention. Robert had always kept the business separate from the house. Clear lines. Clear records. He used to say, confusion is how families get destroyed after funerals. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, I wondered if he had simply understood something I didn't. Vanessa reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip. The movement was small, elegant, measured, and somehow theatrical. She set the glass down with care and asked, "Will all documents be read today?" Mr. Holloway looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at the folder. The primary directives, yes, he said. Primary directives. Again, with the careful language. I watched her nod. Not surprised. Not anxious. Prepared. And that was when the first real chill moved through me. Not the kind caused by grief, but the kind that comes when something inside you recognizes a pattern before your mind is ready to name it. There had been signs before this. Not dramatic ones. Small ones. Easy ones. The kind women talk themselves out of because they are too tired to start a war over every strange glance and missing document. 3 days after the funeral, I had gone into Robert's study to find the Warney paperwork for the car. I knew exactly where he kept it, second drawer, left side, in a brown folder labeled household. It wasn't there. Instead, there were new folders. New labels. Neater than his handwriting. More decorative. Vanessa's handwriting. I knew it instantly. She wrote birthday cards as if she were signing boutique gift tags. When I asked Daniel about it later on the phone, he said, "Oh, Vanessa was just trying to help organize a few things." A few things. In my husband's private office. Without asking me, I remember pausing, waiting for him to hear the problem in his own sentence. He never did, or pretended not to. Then there was the safe, and the missing key to Robert's old desk, and the fact that Daniel, who had barely visited in the last 6 months, suddenly knew exactly which insurance policy had renewed in January and which investment account needed immediate attention. At the time, I mistook efficiency for concern. I see that now. The elderly are often expected to be grateful when someone takes charge, even when that someone is quietly removing your hands from the wheel. Mr. Holloway began reading from the first page. Most of it was formal, legal language, statements of identity, sound mind, witness certification. The bones of the document before the flesh of it was exposed. I sat very still. Daniel shifted once, then settled. Vanessa placed a hand lightly over her folder and lowered her gaze, though I could tell from the corners of her mouth that she was alert to every word. I looked at the attorney's hands. He was careful with the pages. Too careful, as if he understood that paper could cut deeper than glass. Then he paused. It was brief, a single beat, but in a room that quiet, a pause becomes an announcement. He looked up from the document. "Before I continue," he said, "I want to remind everyone that the decedent's wishes were recorded clearly, and my role is to present them as written." Daniel exhaled through his nose. Vanessa did not move at all. I felt my spine straighten. Something was coming. I knew it the way animals know when the air changes before a storm. And then Daniel spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, almost casually. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "let's be honest. Mom doesn't deserve anything." No one moved. The sentence didn't sound real at first. It floated in the room for a second, separate from us, as if it had been said by someone standing outside the door. Then it landed. Heavy. Sharp. Belmano. Mr. Holloway blinked. "Mr. Carter," he said, But Daniel kept going. My father built everything, he said. The company, the investments, the house. My mother lived well, sure, but let's not pretend she contributed in the same way. I turned my head slowly toward him. Still, he did not look at me. He was speaking to the room, to the file, to the version of events he had already chosen. And suddenly I understood something that hurt more than the words themselves. This was not spontaneous. No son says something like that for the first time in front of an attorney. This had been discussed before, repeated before, approved before, maybe even rehearsed. And Vanessa, still seated upright, still perfectly composed, still not pretending shock, had heard it enough times to remain comfortable while he said it. That was the moment I stopped feeling surprised. Not because the pain lessened, but because the truth had finally taken shape. I had not walked into a difficult meeting. I had walked into an arrangement, and I was the only one who hadn't been invited into its making. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. That, more than anything, frightened me. Because grief shakes you. Humiliation burns. But clarity? Clarity goes cold. And I had just begun to understand exactly how cold I could become. No one corrected him. That was the first confirmation. If what Daniel had said was truly out of line, if it had been said in anger or grief or some momentary lapse in judgment, someone would have stepped in. The attorney, Vanessa, anyone. But no one did. The room simply absorbed it, like it belonged there. Mr. Holloway adjusted his glasses again, his fingers lingering just a second too long at the frame. It was a small gesture, but I recognized it for what it was. Delay. Mr. Carter, he said carefully, as I mentioned, my role is to read your father's will as it stands. Personal opinions, I understand. Daniel cut in, his tone polite but firm. I'm just saying we should all be realistic here. Realistic. The word settled into the room like dust. I kept my eyes lowered, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to hear everything. Every word, every tone, every assumption they thought I would quietly accept. Very well, Mr. Holloway said. He looked down at the document again and began. I, Robert James Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The words were formal, structured, familiar. Robert had always believed in clarity, in preparation, in making sure no one would have to guess what he wanted. That belief was the only reason I was still sitting there. The first portions passed quickly. Charitable donations, minor accounts, personal items assigned to distant relatives and longtime employees. Normal things, expected things. No one reacted, not even Vanessa. She simply listened, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable. Daniel checked his watch once, then leaned back again, waiting. Then came the house. The primary residence located at 214 Willow Creek Drive. My breath didn't change. My posture didn't shift, but something inside me tightened. Shall be transferred in full ownership to my son, Daniel Carter. There it was. Simple, clean, final. I didn't react. Not outwardly, but I felt it. Not like a blow, more like a quiet removal, as if something had been lifted out of my hands without ever being offered back. The house. 42 years. Every holiday, every birthday, every quiet morning and late-night conversation. Every wall painted together. Every repair made side by side. Every memory reduced to a line in a document. Daniel didn't look at me. He just nodded slightly, as if confirming something he already knew. Vanessa's lips curved just barely. Not a smile. Not quite, but enough. Mr. Holloway continued. Remaining liquid assets, including savings accounts and investment portfolios, shall be distributed as follows. Numbers were mentioned. Percentages. Allocations. Most of it directed toward Daniel. Some toward future trusts. Even a portion reserved for grandchildren we didn't yet have. Nothing was said about me. Not at first. I sat there, still, listening, waiting, because there had to be something. Robert wouldn't. He couldn't. Additionally, Mr. Holloway said, turning the page, a personal provision has been included for Mrs. Evelyn Carter. There it was. A shift in the air. Small, but real. Daniel's shoulders moved slightly. Vanessa's fingers stilled. I lifted my gaze. Just a little. Not to them. To the attorney. He hesitated. Again. That same careful pause. But this time, it wasn't procedural. It was personal. Mrs. Carter is to receive. He stopped, cleared his throat, adjusted the paper. A one-time disbursement in the amount of $50,000. Silence. It took a moment for the number to settle, not because it was small, but because of what it represented. $50,000. For a life. For marriage. For everything I had built, supported, held together. That was the value assigned to me. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't speak, but something inside me clicked. Not broke, clicked, because now I understood. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't grief making things messy. This was structure. Intentional. Precise. Measured. Vanessa leaned slightly toward Daniel. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. Her lips moved just barely. A whisper. A confirmation. Daniel exhaled. Relief. Relief. That was the moment everything became clear. He hadn't been unsure. He hadn't been grieving. He had been waiting. Waiting for this exact outcome. And Vanessa, she hadn't been supporting him. She had been guiding him. Mr. Holloway continued reading, his voice steady but quieter now, as if even he could feel the imbalance in the room. Mrs. Carter will also retain the right to reside in the primary residence for a period not exceeding 30 days following the reading of this will. 30 days. I almost smiled. Not from humor. From recognition. 30 days to leave my own home. 30 days to dismantle a lifetime. 30 days to disappear neatly. I folded my hands together more tightly in my lap. Still no one looked at me. Still no one asked if I was okay. Still no one acknowledged what had just been done. Because to them, it had already been decided. I glanced once, just once, at Daniel. This time he met my eyes. Briefly. And what I saw there wasn't anger. Wasn't cruelty. It was something worse. Indifference. As if I were already no longer part of the equation. I looked away first. Not because I lost, but because I didn't need to look anymore. Everything I needed to understand was already in front of me. The will wasn't just dividing assets. It was revealing truth. And the truth was simple. They thought I had nothing. No power, no claim, no place left in this story. They thought this was the end. They were wrong. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Robert Carter never trusted a single document to tell the whole story. And neither did I. I didn't say anything after the will was read. Not because I agreed. Not because I was too weak to respond. But because there are moments in life when speaking too soon means losing the advantage of understanding. And I had just begun to understand everything. Robert used to say something I never fully appreciated until that moment. Evelyn, he would tell me, usually when we were sitting on the back porch in the late afternoon, people don't show you who they are when things are good. They show you when something valuable is on the table. At the time, I thought he meant business. Contracts. Deals. Negotiations. I didn't realize he was talking about family. We built that house together. Not just financially. Not just structurally. We built it in pieces of time. The first year, we could barely afford the down payment. I remember standing in the empty living room, the floors still unfinished, the windows without curtains, holding a cup of coffee in both hands just to keep them warm. Robert walked in carrying a folding chair. One step at a time, he said. That was his way. Never rushed. Never careless. Everything deliberate. I chose the paint for every wall. He installed every light fixture himself. We argued over cabinets once. He wanted dark oak. I wanted something lighter. We compromised. We always did. When Daniel was born, we turned the smallest bedroom into a nursery. I painted the walls a soft blue while Robert assembled the crib, pretending he understood the instructions better than he did. He didn't, but he refused to admit it. There were years when money was tight. Years when Robert worked late into the night, building his company from nothing more than an idea and a second-hand desk. And I held everything else together. The house, the schedules, the quiet, invisible structure of our life. No one writes that part down. No one calculates the value of it. But without it, nothing else stands. I remember one night, Daniel was maybe 10 years old, when Robert came home later than usual. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Something deeper. He sat at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a long time. Just stared at his hands. I made him tea. Didn't ask questions right away. That was something I learned early in our marriage. Robert didn't respond well to pressure. He responded to space. After a while, he said, "If something ever happens to me, I need to know you'll be okay." I laughed a little. "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said. He didn't smile. "That's not the point." I sat across from him then, really looked at him. "What are you saying?" I asked. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was telling me a secret. "Everything I'm building," he said, "it's not just for me. It's for you. It's for us. I don't ever want you in a position where you have to depend on anyone else. Not even Daniel. Not even Daniel." At the time, it sounded almost unnecessary. Of course we could trust our son. Of course he would take care of me if something happened. That's what family does. But Robert never believed in of course. He believed in certainty. "I've made arrangements," he said. "Layers, not just one document. I don't trust systems that rely on a single point of failure." I remember smiling at that. "You're talking like an engineer again," I teased. He shrugged. "Maybe, but I've seen what happens when people assume the obvious will hold." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to, because I trusted him completely. And that trust is what brought me into that room. That's why I sat there, silent, while my son reduced my life to a financial inconvenience. That's why I didn't interrupt when Vanessa watched me like she was waiting for me to break. Because somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, there was something else. A memory, not just of what we built, but of how Robert thought, how he planned, how he prepared for things no one else saw coming. The way they read that day, it was too clean, too simple, too incomplete. That wasn't Robert. Robert didn't leave loose ends. He didn't leave things open to interpretation. And he certainly didn't leave me with nothing but a polite exit and a countdown clock, which meant one of two things. Either I had never truly known the man I spent 42 years with, or there was something they hadn't found. I kept my expression neutral, my posture steady, my voice silent, because the moment you show people you know something they don't, they start closing doors. And I wasn't ready for that yet. Not until I understood exactly what had been taken and what was still mine. I glanced once more at the table, at the folder in front of Mr. Holloway, at Daniel's relaxed posture, at Vanessa's quiet satisfaction. They thought the story had already been written, that the ending was fixed, that all that remained was for me to accept it. They were wrong, because the man I married, the man I built my life with, never trusted a single version of the truth. And neither would I. I didn't go back to the house right away after the will reading. Not because I had somewhere else to be, but because I needed time. Time to let everything settle, not emotionally, but logically. Grief clouds judgment. Shock distorts memory. And I couldn't afford either of those anymore. I sat in my car for a long time. Engine off, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Watching people come and go from the building as if nothing had changed. As if lives weren't quietly being dismantled behind closed doors. 30 days. I said out loud, not in anger, just to hear how it sounded. Measured, final, almost generous if you didn't look too closely. 30 days to leave a house I had built. 30 days to pack away 4 decades of existence. 30 days to become irrelevant. I turned the key in the ignition slowly, not rushing, not reacting, because rushing is what people expect from someone who has just lost everything. And I had no intention of giving them that satisfaction. When I walked back into the house, the silence greeted me again. But this time, it felt different. Before, it had been absence. Now it felt like evidence. I closed the door behind me and stood still for a moment, listening, not for sound, for memory, for alignment, trying to feel where things no longer matched what they used to be. Then I went straight to Robert's study. The door was exactly as I had left it that morning. Slightly open, a thin line of shadow cutting across the floor. I pushed it open slowly. The air inside was still, undisturbed. At least, that's what it would look like to anyone who didn't know better. But I knew better now. I walked to the desk, ran my fingers lightly across the surface. Smooth, clean, too clean. Robert was meticulous, yes, but not sterile. He left traces of himself everywhere. Papers slightly out of alignment, a pen resting at an angle, a note scribbled in the margin of a document, small signs of movement, of life. This felt curated. I opened the top drawer again. Same as before. Organized. Labeled. Wrong. I pulled out one of the folders. Household utilities. Vanessa's handwriting. Neat. Decorative. Controlled. I flip it open. Everything was there. Bills. Statements. Receipts. Arranged in chronological order. Perfect. Too perfect. Because Robert never filed things like that. He kept what mattered. Discarded what didn't. Efficiency over appearance. Always. I closed the folder. Placed it back exactly where I found it. Then I moved to the second drawer. The one that used to hold personal documents. Insurance policies. Backup copies. Things he never discussed openly. Empty. Not disorganized. Not shuffled. Removed. That was the difference. I stood there for a moment, letting that realization settle. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't confusion. This was selection. Someone had gone through this room and decided what stayed and what disappeared. I didn't panic. Didn't rush to check everything at once. Because panic leads to mistakes. And whoever had done this had not made any. Not obvious ones. I turned slowly, looked at the bookshelf, the cabinets, the safe. The safe. It sat exactly where it always had. Low, built into the wall. Discreet. Unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it held. I stepped closer, ran my hand across the metal surface. Cold. Familiar. And yet not. I entered the code. Carefully. The same one Robert had used for years. The one tied to a date only we would remember. The keypad blinked. Paused. Then error. I tried again. Slower this time. More deliberate. Error. I didn't try a third time. Because I already knew. The code hadn't been forgotten. It had been changed. I let my hand rest against the safe for a moment longer. Not pressing. Just acknowledging. This was the center. Not the will. Not the words spoken in that room. This. Whatever had been inside this safe, whatever had been removed, that was the truth they didn't want me to see. I stepped back slowly. Not defeated. Not overwhelmed. Focused. Because now I had something real. Not suspicion. Not emotion. Evidence. I turned toward the desk again. My eyes scanning. Not searching wildly, but tracing patterns. Looking for what didn't belong. That's when I saw it. A small detail. Easy to miss. The pen holder. Robert always kept two pens there. One. Black. One silver. Aligned. Parallel. Now there were three. The third one was newer. Different weight. Different finish. I picked it up. Turned it in my fingers. It wasn't his. Which meant someone else had been sitting here. Working here. Writing here. Not just organizing. Altering. I placed the pen back exactly where it had been. Aligned it with the others. Perfectly. Then I stepped away from the desk. Because the moment you disturb a scene, you lose the chance to understand how it was arranged. And I needed to understand everything. From a safe, to the missing documents, to the new handwriting, to the calm confidence in Vanessa's eyes. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about control. And control leaves patterns. I walked to the doorway and paused. Looked back at the room one last time. They thought I would pack. Sort. Cry. Call movers. Ask for help. They thought I would accept the timeline they had given me. 30 days. I almost smiled. Because what they didn't realize, what they hadn't accounted for, was that I wasn't counting days. I was counting details. And details are what unravel everything. I didn't expect anyone to call me. Not that day. Not after what had just happened. People tend to retreat after moments like that. They say what they need to say, take what they came for, and then disappear into the comfort of their own decisions. So when my phone rang that evening, I let it ring twice before answering. Mrs. Carter? The voice was familiar. Measured. Careful. Mr. Holloway, I replied. I didn't ask why he was calling. I already had a feeling. There was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation. Consideration. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said. You're not, I answered. Another pause. Then, there are a few things I believe you should be aware of. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not surprised. Not relieved. Just attentive. About the will? I asked. Yes, he said. Then, after a moment, and about your husband. That was new. I didn't speak. Didn't rush him. Because men like Mr. Holloway don't call widows in the evening unless they've already decided to cross a line. I would prefer not to discuss this over the phone, he continued. If you're available, I can meet you tomorrow morning. Privately. Privately. I looked around the house as he said it. The walls. The hallway. The quiet. Yes, I said. We agreed on a time. A small cafe about 15 minutes from my house. Neutral ground. After I hung up, I didn't move right away. I just sat there, letting the silence settle around me again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like something had just shifted, because until that moment, everything I had was instinct, observation, pattern recognition. Now, I was about to have confirmation, or contradiction, either way, truth. The next morning, I arrived early. Of course I did. Old habits. Preparedness. The cafe was quiet at that hour. Soft light through wide windows. The low hum of a coffee machine in the background. A few scattered customers, each absorbed in their own routines. I chose a table in the corner. Back to the wall. Clear view of the entrance. Robert used to prefer that seat too. Always know who's coming, he would say. Mr. Holloway arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. He spotted me immediately. Walked over with that same careful expression he had worn in the office. Mrs. Carter, he said, taking the seat across from me. Mr. Holloway. No small talk. No plaisanteries. He placed a folder on the table. Not the same one from yesterday. This one was thinner. Older. That was the first thing I noticed. I'm going to speak plainly, he said. I think I'll be best. I nodded. He opened the folder slowly. What you heard yesterday, he began, was a valid document. I didn't react. But, he continued, it was not the only one your husband created. There it was. Not a surprise. Not entirely. But hearing it said out loud made it real. Explain, I said. Mr. Holloway adjusted the papers slightly. Your husband revised his estate plan multiple times over the past few years, he said. That's not unusual. What is unusual is how the final version was submitted. Submitted by whom? I asked. He hesitated. Just slightly. Your son, he said. Silence. I let it sit there. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fill it. Because silence has a way of making people tell you more than they intended. Mr. Holloway continued. About 6 weeks before your husband passed, he said, I received instructions to finalize and file the document that was read yesterday. From Daniel, I said. Yes. And you didn't find that unusual? I asked. At the time, he said carefully, your husband had been unwell. It's not uncommon for family members to assist with administrative matters. Assist? That's not what happened, I said quietly. Mr. Holloway met my eyes. For the first time, fully. No, he said, I don't believe it is. There was a shift in his tone now. Subtle, but firm. Your husband met with me privately 3 months before that, he continued. He made it very clear that his estate plan was not to be altered without his direct authorization. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic. Recognition. That sounds like Robert, I said. Mr. Holloway nodded. He was very specific, he said. I almost smiled. Yes, he was. So what changed? I asked. Mr. Holloway slid one of the papers toward me. Not across the table. Just enough for me to see it. A signature. Robert's. Or something that looked like it. He submitted this, Mr. Holloway said, along with the final version of the will. I studied it. Carefully. To anyone else, it would pass. But I'd seen that signature thousands of times. On checks. On letters. On birthday cards. And this was close. But not right. The spacing. The pressure. The slight curve at the end of his name. All just a fraction off. He didn't sign this, I said. Mr. Holloway exhaled slowly. I didn't think so either, he said. There it was. Confirmation. Not suspicion. Not theory. Fact. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not shocked. Not overwhelmed. Just certain. Vanessa, I said. He didn't respond immediately, but he didn't deny it either. I don't have proof of her direct involvement, he said carefully. But I can tell you this. Your son did not act alone in this level of coordination. Coordination. Such a polite word. For something so deliberate. So there's another will, I said. Yes, he replied. And where is it? Another pause. Then, not where they think it is. I felt it then. That shift again. The same one from the night before. The one that told me this story was far from over. Robert left instructions, Mr. Holloway continued. Very specific ones, about when and how the other document should be revealed. I held his gaze, and he closed the folder gently. And I believe, he said, that moment has just arrived. Silence. But this time it wasn't empty. It was electric, because everything Daniel and Vanessa had done, everything they thought they had secured, everything they believed was final, was about to be tested. And this time, I wouldn't be the one sitting quietly at the table. I didn't ask Mr. Holloway for details right away. That might sound strange. Most people, in that moment, would lean forward, demand answers, try to grab hold of whatever hope had just been placed in front of them. But I didn't, because hope, handled too quickly, turns into noise. And I needed clarity. Tell me what Robert wanted, I said. My voice was steady, calm, controlled. Mr. Holloway studied me for a moment, not evaluating, confirming. He anticipated interference, he said, not necessarily from a specific person, but from circumstances. I almost smiled at that. That was Robert. He never assumed betrayal, but he always prepared for failure. He created a secondary document, Mr. Holloway continued, separate from the primary will, stored under different conditions, with specific release instructions. And those instructions? I asked. He paused. Then, to be executed if the original terms of his estate appeared to have been altered or manipulated. There it was. Not revenge. Not punishment. Protection. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. He knew, I said quietly. Mr. Holloway didn't answer. He didn't need to, because now everything made sense. The layers, the conversations, the quiet certainty in Robert's voice all those years ago. He hadn't been paranoid. He had been prepared. What do you need from me? I asked. Mr. Holloway slid the folder slightly closer. Confirmation, he said. Not emotional. Not speculative. Evidence. I nodded. That I could do, because I already had pieces. The study, the missing documents, the safe, the signature. They weren't random. They were connected. And now, I knew what I was looking for. I'll need access to the house, he continued. And anything that may have been removed or altered. You'll have it, I said. And Mrs. Carter, I looked up. You cannot let them know, he said. Not yet. I held his gaze. They already think they've won, I said. A faint shift in his expression. Almost approval. Good, he replied. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel lighter. I didn't feel relieved. I felt precise. Because now, for the first time since Robert died, I wasn't reacting. I was moving, back at the house. I didn't go to the study immediately. That would have been predictable. Instead, I walked through the front door, slowly like nothing had changed. Set my keys down, removed my coat, placed it neatly on the chair. Routine, because routine is invisible, and invisible is safe. Only then did I move. Not quickly, not urgently, deliberately. To the study. The room looked exactly as I'd left it. Too clean, too controlled, too quiet. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Not fully, just enough. Then I began, not searching, observing. The desk first. Drawers opened in the same order. Top to bottom, left to right. Nothing disturbed. Good. That meant whoever had done this was confident. Confident people make mistakes. Careful ones, but mistakes nonetheless. Then the bookshelf. Robert kept certain things there. Not documents. Not anything obvious. Patterns. Old notebooks. Business journals. Reference materials he hadn't touched in years, but refused to throw away. I ran my fingers lightly along the spines. Stopped. One book felt wrong. Not visually. Not at first glance. But in weight. I pulled it out. A hardcover volume on financial regulations. Outdated. Unremarkable. I opened it. Nothing. Flipped a few pages. Then there. A fold. Not accidental. Deliberate. Page 214. I paused. Not excitement. Not relief. Recognition. Robert never marked pages randomly. If he folded something, it meant something. Inside the fold was a small slip of paper. Blank. At least at first glance. I held it up to the light. Nothing. Then I turned it over. Still nothing. I almost put it back. Almost. But something stopped me. Not instinct. Not emotion. Pattern. Robert didn't leave clues halfway. If something looked empty, it wasn't. I walked to the window. Let the light hit it differently. Still nothing. Then I remembered. Heat. I moved to the desk. Picked up a lighter from the drawer. Held the edge of the paper, just close enough. Not burning. Warming. And slowly, very slowly, letters began to appear. Faint. Then clearer. A sequence. Numbers. Coordinates. And beneath them, a single word. Secondary. I lowered the paper. Heart steady. Mind sharper than it had been in days. This wasn't just a backup. This was a system. And I had just found the first key. Behind me, the house remained silent. Unaware. Unchanged. Or, at least, that's what anyone watching would think. But everything had shifted. Because, now, I wasn't just the woman they had written out of the story. I was the one holding the part they had never seen. And soon they were going to realize just how much they had missed. 3 days later, I asked Daniel to meet. I didn't explain why. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply said, we need to sit down again. With the attorney. There was a pause on the phone. A long one. Then why? He asked. Not concern. Not curiosity. Caution. Because I'm not finished, I said. Silence. Then Vanessa's voice, faint in the background. What did she say? Daniel lowered his voice, but not enough. She wanted another meeting. Another pause. Then, clearer this time, fine, Vanessa said. Let's do it. They thought I was confused. That was the first mistake. The second meeting was held in the same room. Same table. Same chairs. Same carefully controlled silence. But this time, I didn't sit near the window. I sat at the head. No one said anything about it. But I saw it. The flicker in Daniel's eyes. The slight tightening in Vanessa's posture. Because position matters. Mr. Holloway entered with 2 folders this time. Not 1. 2. He didn't sit immediately. He looked at Daniel. Then at Vanessa. Then at me. And finally he sat down. We are here, he began, to review additional documentation related to the estate of Robert Carter. Daniel leaned back, trying to look relaxed. What additional documentation? He asked. Mr. Holloway didn't answer him. Instead, he opened the second folder, the older one. Before I proceed, he said, I need to ask a direct question. He looked at Daniel. Did you submit the final version of your father's will to this office 6 weeks prior to his passing? Daniel hesitated, just a fraction. Then, yes. Did your father personally deliver that document? Mr. Holloway asked. Another pause. No, Daniel said. Did you witness him sign it? Silence. This time longer. Vanessa shifted slightly beside him. Then Daniel said, he was sick. He asked me to handle it. Careful. Very careful. But not precise. Mr. Holloway nodded slowly. I see. Then he turned the page. What I'm about to present, he said, is a secondary estate document created by Robert Carter under specific conditions. The room changed. Not visibly, but I felt it. The shift. Because suddenly, they weren't in control anymore. Mr. Holloway placed the document on the table. This document, he continued, was to be revealed only if there was evidence of alteration, interference, or misrepresentation of his primary will. Vanessa went still, completely still. Daniel leaned forward. What are you saying? He asked. Mr. Holloway didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm saying, he replied, that the document read 3 days ago is no longer considered the controlling version of this estate. Silence. Heavy. Final. Daniel looked at Vanessa. For the first time, not for guidance. For answers. She didn't give him any. Read it, Daniel said. His voice tighter now. Controlled, but cracking. Mr. Holloway nodded. Then began. I, Robert James Carter, being of sound mind and body. Same opening. But everything after was different. The primary residence, a pause, shall remain under the sole ownership of my wife, Evelyn Carter. Daniel froze. Vanessa's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The control slipped. Just for a second. All business holdings, another page, are to be liquidated and placed into a trust, administered independently, with no direct control granted to any single beneficiary. No control. Daniel leaned back slowly. as if the chair had suddenly become unstable beneath him. And finally, Mr. Holloway looked up, directly at them. In the event that any party is found to have interfered with, altered, or misrepresented the execution of this estate, a pause. That party shall be immediately disinherited. Silence. Complete. Vanessa's hand tightened on the table. Just slightly. But I saw it. Daniel looked at her again. This time fully. "What did you do?" he asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the truth was already sitting on the table. I didn't speak. Not yet. I let the silence do its work, because silence forces people to face what they've done. Finally, I stood, slowly, calmly. "I built that house," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "I built that life," I continued. I looked at Daniel, not as a mother, but as someone who had finally seen clearly. "And you," I said quietly, almost helped someone take it from me. He didn't respond. He couldn't, because for the first time, he understood. Vanessa stood abruptly. "We should go," she said, but her voice wasn't steady anymore. Daniel didn't move. Not right away. And that hesitation told me everything. I picked up my coat, turned toward the door. No anger, no shouting, no scene, because I didn't need one. The truth had already done the work for me. As I reached the door, I paused, just for a moment. Then I said, "You thought I had nothing." A small breath. "That was your biggest mistake." And then I walked away, not as a victim, but as the only person in that room who had known when to stay silent and when to end the story.